And good morning, everyone. I'm Lucas Pyatt, Chairman of the Board for the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership, the President and COO of Millcraft Investments, and President of Pyatt Sotheby's International Realty. It's my privilege to welcome you to this year's 2021 State of Downtown Pittsburgh virtual meeting. This marks the first year of hosting this annual meeting virtually. And while we miss seeing you all in person, we're excited with this new format, and it's giving us the ability to dive in a little bit deeper into individual topics. As most of you know, every year the PDP produces an annual State of Downtown Pittsburgh report. This report takes a comprehensive look at the downtown economy by examining numerous sectors. It provides a snapshot overview of how our city center performed over the last year, a year that was like no other. It is without question that 2021 was an incredibly challenging year, and on so many fronts, not just for downtown Pittsburgh, but for cities across the globe. Despite a rather turbulent 2020 and a somewhat rocky start to 21, there's palatable momentum building as we reopen offices and begin to welcome visitors back to downtown Pittsburgh. Thanks to science, the state's new reopening orders, coupled with the steady continuation of vaccinations and the desire for people to get back to life as we know it, we are excited to work with you to build an even stronger downtown. First, though, let's take a look back at 2020. A year ago, in March, there was an unparalleled immediate shift, and it happened practically overnight. We went from a city center built to serve 120,000 people per day to a place that's hosting about 10% of that total. And while uncertainty was a central theme for last year, there's no denying that the certainty of downtown Pittsburgh's resiliency for the PDP, this means being creative while staying committed to opportunities that lie ahead as we reforge downtown and reemerge as a vital and connected urban center. Today's virtual event will reflect on the challenges of an unprecedented year. We'll look to the future too, by focusing on strategies for revitalizing downtown as economic recovery efforts get underway. Soon, you'll be hearing from a panel of seasoned experts who will address the future of commercial office in downtown Pittsburgh.
According to JLL, as of March of 2021, actual rents are down 5 to 15% compared to pre-COVID-19 levels. CBRE research reported that the total amount of sublease space that came on the market in 2020 was double the amount available in 2019. Despite large subleasing opportunities and increasing vacancies overall, the Golden Triangle saw some notable leasing announcements. Dollar Bank announced their move to Gateway Center headquarters to a new 76,000 square foot space on several floors of 20 Stanwick Street. Nearby, Whiteford Taylor Preston, a Baltimore-based law firm, inked a deal to take 16,000 square feet of space at 11 Stanwick Street, with a future option to expand. PwC, one of Pittsburgh's largest accounting firms, leased 15,000 square feet of new office space at 1 Oxford Center. In 2020, 300,000 square feet of new office space was delivered, all in the Strip District. The Stacks at 3 Crossings, 3,000 Smallman Street, and the Produce Terminal. With a limited number of construction starts in the office market in 2020, the delivery of new square footage will likely decrease in the coming years. We all know that there's no real clarity about the long-term impact of work from home policies and what that will have on the commercial real estate market. But we are hearing almost daily about offices reopening in downtown, and we're very excited for them to return. So enough of the doom and gloom. Let's get to the good part, the discussion with our panel of experts. So we want this session to be as interactive as possible. You can submit questions by using the Q&A feature button on the bottom of your screen at any point during the panel discussion. We'll also allow time near the end of the session to answer as many questions from the audience as time allows. For the remainder of this session, I'm going to turn it over to our friend and colleague, our moderator, Mark Anthony Thomas. He's president of the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance, and in his role, Mark is responsible for creating, developing, and executing the economic development strategy for the 10-county Pittsburgh region. Not a small task these days. as well as advancing partnerships to drive job creation and business investment. Thank you for joining us today, and take it away, Mark.
Great. So first, thanks for having me. Good morning, everyone. We have an exciting panel. Obviously, from just to kick off this morning, downtown's important. It's important not just to the city, but to the region. It's the second largest business district in the state. So obviously it has an outsized impact on our broader economy. And so anything we can do collectively to reforge downtown, we're on board with that. As they mentioned, I lead the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance and work with all 10 counties to really strengthen our broader economy. And today, working closely with the commercial real estate industry, we've assembled a pretty rock star panel for you to talk about a path forward. And so I'd like to start introducing the panelists. Just so we stay on time, I won't be long, so we can jump straight into the conversation. And so first, I have Greg Bruges, who is the regional principal at Colliers International. He brings more than 30 plus years in the space of investment property sales and owner-occupied investments. Next, we have Dana Garcia, who serves as the Vice President of Corporate Real Estate for Highmark Health. Dana is responsible for Highmark health plans and diversified business and dental, vision, and supplemental health products across the US. Next, we have Carrie Holstead, who's the founder and CEO of Carrie S. Holstead Real Estate Consultants, the longest established and first women-owned tenant representation firm in Pittsburgh. We have Andrea Karate, from architect and design sales manager at Cole, a national firm that uses modern design to connect people to their work, their lives, and to the world. And then last, we have Jason Stewart, who serves as the managing director at JLL Pittsburgh. And Jason's been with JLL for 10 years, focused on office leasing and development, specifically within the central business district, the urban research corridors, and suburban markets. Question now for Andrea. First, you bring an interesting perspective to this conversation for when you work directly with building owners and tenants. And so curious to know from Noel, can you walk us through the challenges that your clients are facing related to professional workspaces and how they're kind of balancing that with their home offices?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Knoll has been in business since 1938, providing commercial office and residential furniture. So we've seen a lot of trends in the market, although I would imagine this is probably the most extreme that we've ever experienced. We have a really strong research and design component to our company as well. And so as soon as we went into quarantine, those divisions obviously went into overdrive, trying to sort of anticipate what our clients were going to need and trying to figure out the different ways to support them. I think that our clients and the tenants that we saw really, they fell into two very distinct camps, and a smaller portion, which was getting back into the office immediately. And so for them, it was really about how quickly can we bring people in safely. And it was much more about separation and providing screens and building up panels and really giving people an opportunity to separate. Because Pittsburgh is a fairly conservative market when it comes to the space planning and how the offices are laid out. So we weren't really faced with too many, benching situations where people are really tightly packed in, like we see in some other large cities. But it was really much more about sort of making areas a little bit higher and just providing separation where we needed to. And then I think the rest of our clients, for the most part, sort of fall into that other side, which is really what we're dealing with right now. For people that chose to just stay home, everybody stayed home, took the pause, waited until it was a little bit safer to bring people back, a little bit longer term plan. And in that case, they're looking at the office a little bit more holistically and thinking about some bigger, longer term changes in how their employees are going to be working and what that's going to look like. And it's definitely much more about individual spaces versus collaborative spaces, and what are the ratios of that and how those are laid out. And really the biggest issue being hybrid, and how are they going to be attacking the issue of people being in the office versus people being at home and working together. And then secondly, when it comes to the home office, also we saw a huge spectrum that we were trying to help and support our clients. We had both people that were providing subsidies or stipends to their employees to try and, really help furnish their home office. Our retail side of the business, our residential side saw a huge increase in business this year because people very quickly realized that their home offices were pretty insufficient. And so we saw it all over the spectrum. But for the most part, I think people were left to their own devices to try and, out of pocket, pay for their own, ergonomic chair or sit to stand table, something that was really going to make them more comfortable while they sort of waited out to see what the next step was. But I think that overarching theme, whether commercial or residential, was just that, there was no one solution. Every company, every client, every tenant was definitely looking at the problem, through their own very specific lens.
That's great. A question now for Dana. From Highmark Health's perspective, kind of two parts to this question. How have you first adapted employee workspaces through COVID? And then what has gone into prepping buildings for the return of employees back when that date comes?
Yeah, thanks again for having me today. I really appreciate it. So two really important topic points there, right? First thing we have to do before we bring our employees back is we have to make them feel safe and feel like they're coming back to a place of work that they can feel comfortable in. And so a couple of years ago, we took one of our projects at our Fifth Avenue Place headquarters, and we worked with the International Well Building Institute to set up a program to get it certified as a well certified project. So when we got into the pandemic and we had the stay-at-home order, we used that time as an opportunity to go back through our buildings and look at our cleaning protocols, look at our safety protocols, and really expand what we were doing. So we started to get into the health and safety of the water in the building, health and safety of the air quality in the building. And as a result of that, you'll hear that probably in the next week or so, there'll be an announcement that all of Highmark's headquarters facilities have formally been certified by the Well Building Institute. And that's a huge step. And these are aligned with the ad campaign that you've seen on TV over the last few months from the Well Building Institute. So we think that's sort of step one. The other part to your question on what are we doing about the workspace, again, we had kind of started this process prior to the pandemic, where traditionally, office users look at density, right? And how can they most efficiently use the space? And a lot of that calculation, as Andrea pointed out, is really about how many people can I get into a certain sized box. Instead, about 4 or 5 years ago, Highmark started looking at our space less about how we fit the number of people in and more focused on how does the work get done. And so thinking about how an individual works during their day, if you have them in a high-walled workstation all day, but their day consists of some quiet time, some collaborative activity, some group activity, that one space is not conducive for that. And so we started redesigning as our model into much more flexible space. So what we found is the pandemic really accelerated that process. It helped us with the conversation with our business units to make that conversation more to the point, so that when we bring people back, how are you going to work? How are you going to blend your staff if 10 or 15 or 20% of your staff is predominantly working from home? How do you make sure that they feel as though they're part of the meeting when the balance of the meeting attendees are in the room? And there's some technology changes that will need to occur, et cetera. But as was stated earlier, this is going to be a learning process. This is definitely not going to be a situation where we flip a switch and it's going to be back to January of 20, right? This is going to be a situation that we're going to do some project spaces. We're going to test them. We're going to learn from those. And then we'll adjust our space as we go, as the business learns more.
That's great. And I will say for the audience quickly, we will have a Q&A in about 20 minutes. And so if you do have any questions that come to mind now, please add them in the chat feature. I'd like to turn to Greg. You've been involved in some of the more notable investment transactions in the broader region. What are you seeing from your clients who are both looking to acquire property or maybe even sell their own assets?
Hey, thanks, Mark. And I did want to thank you and Jeremy and Rich for your leadership. It's much appreciated by the region. Also, I wanted to give a shout out to the Pitt men's soccer team, who's in the Final Four. So go Panthers. On the investment side, first of all, I'll speak to the buyers. There are a lot of interested investors locally, regionally, and nationally that are always interested in Pittsburgh. There has been an incredible amount of equity that has been built up over the pandemic because transactions weren't getting completed, but you have all these private equity firms who have to deploy capital. So there's a ton of money out there. Quite honestly, the years before the pandemic, there was a lot of equity looking for commercial real estate deals all over the country, but again, specifically in Pittsburgh. Investors like Pittsburgh's 5 strong market fundamentals, coupled with interest rates, which are historic lows. The buyer pool is incredible for Pittsburgh commercial real estate. Problem is there's not much product. Quite honestly, prior to the pandemic, there wasn't a lot of product. I think since March 1st of 2017, we had 3 sales of stabilized investment office projects that were sold over 100,000 square feet. But we had just as many 100,000 square foot sales that were repositioned properties. They were they were office buildings turned into apartments. So we just haven't had a ton of product on the market as far as stabilized office properties. I don't think that's going to change because when we talk to investors locally, one, they don't have to sell, but it is a good time because of the interest. But nobody wants to be the first out of the gate and potentially experience a COVID discount that they think could be out there. I personally don't think there is a COVID discount, quite honestly, because of the amount of equity in the low interest rate environment. I think that prices will be the same or higher than they have been pre-pandemic. So it's just the dog chasing its tail, and we don't have enough product, but we do have enough buyers.
I do have a general question and this is for panelists. How different is the Pittsburgh market performing to other major markets, which is something we haven't touched on, at least from the commercial real estate side?
I could take a shot at that.
Yeah.
So right now, JLL, nationally speaking, where the real revenue is, which is unfortunately the barometer for leasing velocity, it's really in the life science space, which Mark, is near and dear to your heart. So, people there are bidding wars for space in the Bay Area, San Diego, and in Boston. San Francisco has got the largest amount of sublease office space anywhere in the country by kind of a wide margin. And there are some large transactions that are starting to get done in those sublease spaces. So life sciences has been plowing along all during the pandemic. And right now in the major markets, we are starting to see a lot more leasing in the secondary markets for which Pittsburgh is a part. Will probably lag behind those major markets, but they definitely are starting to pick back up again.
That's great.
Same thing, Mark. We see life sciences all over the country with Collier's offices is on fire. Any life sciences investment sale that comes on the market is achieving unbelievable numbers, sub 5 cap rates, $850, $1,200 a square foot. So life science is really what's driving a lot of markets. And quite honestly, and thankfully, we have a strong life sciences presence. So I think that'll help Pittsburgh.
That's great. And that's actually an area that we anticipate growth long term, just based on the assets within the innovation district and the universities and across the broader region. Question now for Dana, as we're all planning our returns back. We're doing that now too at the conference. Kind of walk us through how Highmark, obviously is one of our largest employers in the region, is helping transition the staff back to the office.
Sure, I'll take this in again in kind of two parts. So what we did is we assembled a group of representatives from all different types of Highmark's business units, and to really get feedback and input on, and what we're terming it, work from anywhere. What does that look like? What does it mean? Because it can mean something very different from an operations person's perspective as opposed to a salesperson's perspective, correct?
Yeah.
And as part of that process, there is a surveying mechanism that we use with the individual, because this is not going to be a case of one size fits all. I may be able to say, hey, working from home works great for me, but I may have a peer or colleague that their home situation isn't as conducive. Maybe there's a number of children that are getting homeschooled. Maybe there's they don't have the facilities at their home to be able to work effectively. So we have to look at it from the business's perspective, and then we also have to look at it from the individual's perspective. So it is going to be an iterative process. And I say two parts because I'd like to also touch on, someone added a question to the Q&A, and I'll kind of elaborate a little bit more. So that's why we chose to, instead of universally going through and adjusting all of our space proactively before the individuals came back to the office, we instead chose a pathway of using pilots. And so what we've done is we've looked at, we know what sort of a typical office user, what their needs might be. So we started looking at business units that say were at the extreme. So somebody that was, very virtual naturally. All of their files were electronic. They were predominantly knowledge workers, those types of things. And we designed some space for them. We take another extreme. Maybe there's a legal department, or maybe there's an audit area where they have a heavy paper usage. Somebody that has a lot of customer interaction face to face. So we've got about 12 pilot projects that we have kicked off throughout our footprint. We're going to go through a process of doing the workups with each of those business units, and then we'll design space specifically for their needs. Some of those are going to be much more, if you look at the percentage of how the space is laid out, it's a much higher proportion of collaboration space than it is, sit down workspaces. Others, it may have much more, sit down quiet areas for individuals. So it's going to vary by the business unit, but we are going to tailor it to the business's needs and the individual's needs.
That's great. Question for Greg. Obviously, with the current rate of vacancies in the Central Business District, are you hearing anything from property owners or potential sellers about potentially converting office space to other uses?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't get me wrong. If the stabilized office building classic came on the market in Pittsburgh, I think the numbers would be much higher than they were pre-pandemic on a per square foot basis. But for now, most of our investor interest is those that would convert an existing office building or part of it into resi space. We have this conversation all the time with investors, especially coming from outside of Pittsburgh, that they think that Pittsburgh doesn't have the appropriate amount of resi units in the CBD for when the downtown office market does come back. And people are betting that our downtown is going to come back. I think they think that there will be a huge demand from people that will want to live where they work. So that's a conversation we have every week, that we have outside investors that want to buy and convert a building to a residential use. and if you just look at some of the projects that are going on, the Allegheny building converted into apartments, the YWCA City Club's looking at an apartment project there. GNC is rumored to be under contract to a group that's going to do apartments. So, you know, I think the pivot from that type of office space that's an older vintage into resi space, which you know, PMC you know, wrote that book. So we've read the book and we like it. They did it with 6 or 7 buildings years ago, and it's turned out incredibly well. And again, some of the investors, they point to the fact that Pittsburgh has the lowest ratio of CBD residents to MSA population out of Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Baltimore, Cincinnati, and Columbus. So they look at that and they think it's a natural that there is going to be a demand for residential units in the CBD in the next few years.
No, thank you. And I agree with that perspective. And having lived in downtowns, there is something special about that experience versus being in a like traditional neighborhood. Question now for Jason. And this has kind of been a big topic during COVID, that a lot of companies initially could be looking to downsize, but then you have some people predicting that companies may be increasing their footprint so that employees have more personal space and actually have more room within their organization. What are you seeing from clients, and is there any anecdotal information that kind of gives us a sense of the future?
I think Dana hit it best whenever he said that there really is no formula and it's going to be a process, and that,
Okay.
you know, we're never going to go ahead and hit the switch and make it January 1st, 2020 again. And I also think there's 2 different mindsets for tenants. You know, one mindset is the largest tenants that have the capacity to have somebody like Dana Garcia or an advisor like Andrea tell them all the cutting edge next 36-month strategies for occupying space. And then there's locally owned tech that's just candidly out there looking for space that they need for 2021, 2022. That latter set is really, and I want to be very careful the way I say this, they are really kind of going back into business as usual. Right now, the space that is most busy is furnished space. So it's people taking space that might only be 2 or 3 years old, that was furnished and designed pre-pandemic. Again, and I'm not talking about PNC or, you know, AG or, you know, Highmark. You know, I'm talking about your rank and file 5 to 15,000 square foot tenant, where, you know, for the most part, their footprint is staying the same. From a standpoint, something else I wanted to mention, you know, about the way people might start to think about office spaces, you know, what takes place outside of the work area. We're seeing a renewed amenities arms race for landlords to make the office environments more comfortable. Again, Dana made a great point by saying that, you know, a lot of times perception's reality and people want to feel safe in their environment. So I think we're going to start to see landlords spend more and more money on outdoor amenities and on amenities that offer workers something they can't have at home, right? Something that says, oh, I just can't get this done in my second floor office. If I went to the office building and they had this resource for me, that makes it more attractive to me. So again, we don't, candidly, right now, we are a secondary market. We don't see any large scale changes in the way people are looking at densification or footprint, and people are really kind of filling back in the way they were.
No, thank you. Question for Andrea. We've heard a lot also about this complete office reconfiguration post pandemic. Is this hype? What are you seeing actually play out in our market, and how does that compare nationally?
Yes, I think everyone here has sort of touched on the idea that, you know, it's not one size fits all. And I would say that it definitely follows this exact question. We have had clients all over the spectrum. I think most of them fall really into the center of that spectrum, which is they're tweaking. They're making some smaller reconfigurations. They're making some smaller changes. Our dealer partner here in Pittsburgh, which is Workscape, has been working with our clients, you know, some of them making some big changes, but what we're seeing is that the clients are thinking about the office as a little bit more of an ecosystem, and it's not just the only place that people are going to be working from this point on. And so it's just one location. They will be working from home a few days a week. We're seeing the research is telling us around 30% of our clients are expecting to go back 5 days a week, but another larger 56% are thinking that they're going to be anywhere from 1 to 4 days a week remote. So what does that look like? Well, it probably looks like less individual space, more collaborative space. I think we're looking at possibly over the next 2 years around a 26% reduction in individual space. And that's just because more often than not, people do their individual head down focus work better at home versus collaborative work. It's just a lot more difficult to do that from home. So it makes a lot of sense, but really it's about providing those spaces, I think, as Dana touched on, because not every person works well the same way. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from all of this is just providing all of those options and allowing people to pick the way that works, that makes the most sense for them. And I think the other thing that we're seeing with people and why they're looking to reconfigure and change is because if people are working remotely more often and they're only in the office 2 days a week, what is happening with the space that they were previously using? So we're seeing a change in unassigned, assigned to unassigned spaces where we used to be around 80-20. We're going to see a change of around something to like 55 to 45. So if you're only in the office 2 days a week, your private office, what is that being used as the other 3? And we're seeing that, as a great little small person conference room, another touchdown office for other people. So it's really what we've been talking about with our clients is how can they make the most of every square foot that they have by thinking through all the different possible options and just making sure that whatever option we give them, it's something that can be really easily adapted for whatever happens to come down the road.
Awesome. Great. And I have one final question, and I'm going to turn it back over to the PDP to manage the audience questions. But when the pandemic first happened, there was actually a lot of reporting saying we're about to undertake the largest kind of work from home experiment in world history. And I remember thinking this is kind of crazy. What do you think we've learned from this experience? And how does that change like the future of office space moving forward?
Is that for me, Mark?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. And great question. We've just been through the longest work from home study, biggest experiment that's ever been conducted. And there have been a lot of studies. We've learned a lot at this point. And here's what we see going forward based on all of the research that we've been looking at. First of all, there was a tremendous amount of speculation when we started into this pandemic that the office is going away. Nobody's going back to the office. We've adjusted to working at home. And while there are a lot of positive things about working at home and a lot of employees like working at home, it is the case that we're saying that the office is not going away. We need that office. Most of the executives are saying, from a company culture standpoint, we need the office. What we see from the employee standpoint, and Andrea just touched on it, is when folks are working at home on individual projects, it works out really well. When they are trying to collaborate with others or they're trying to do coaching or mentoring, that's where we see it really lacking and not working out well. But as we move forward here, what we're seeing is a real demand for companies to have, and this comes down to retaining and recruiting top talent. We see a demand for companies to have a flexible work from home policy. And in fact, and you may have seen it in the Pittsburgh Business Times, there was another study that was released yesterday afternoon. We're seeing a lot of employees saying, I have to have this. This is so important to me. In fact, up to 30% have said, we're going to leave the company. We're not staying with the company if they don't give us a work from home policy. So we see that as being critical to companies. Technology, Andrea touched on that. I'm in total agreement with it. The technology, how do you keep the people, and Dana mentioned this also, how do you keep the people connected who are working in the office to those who are working elsewhere? You have to have the technology to do so. And then again, we heard this from Dana, we are hearing this every day. There's a new emphasis on health and wellness for employees, and this WELL certification is something we're being asked about on a daily basis. It used to be that we were asked about LEED certification, which stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Now, I believe as a result of the pandemic, it is all about wellness, and you are going to hear more and more and more about WELL certification, both in buildings and in tenant spaces. So that's going to be huge. It is now, and it's going to be going forward. And then Andrea just touched on this, the way in which office space is utilized post-pandemic is going to change. We are going to have this dynamic, this hybrid of people working in the office and some working at home. And how do you become efficient in doing that? Do you have these hot spaces which are shared, whatever space is available when you come into the office, that's what you use? Do you handle it in a different manner? That's the type of thing that is being sorted out. But those are the issues right now, and that's what the this home experiment, work from home experiment, is indicating for the future. Those 5 things. Offices are not going away. You have to have a work from home policy. Technology, you need the latest technology to collaborate between those working in the office and those working at home. Well, there's a new emphasis on the health and wellness for your employees. And then the way in which office space is utilized has changing post-pandemic. That's what we see going forward.
That's awesome. Great. Well, now I'll turn it over to Caitlin, who's going to take questions from the audience.
Okay, thank you, Mark, and thank you, panelists. That was a really awesome discussion, and I am looking forward into getting some questions that were submitted from our attendees. So with just a few minutes left, I'm going to go through a couple questions. Panelists, if you can be as brief as possible in your responses, that would be great, so we can get through as many questions as possible. Okay, so the first question here is, with the rise in people getting vaccinated, does anyone on the panel anticipate employers or even office buildings requiring that people entering the building show proof of vaccination? Is this something that employers are talking about, making this a requirement?
I'm happy to address that. We're not seeing it. Our clients are having discussions about this. In fact, I was on a conference call last week with the CEO of a company and some of his leadership team, and this was an issue that came up. And the response was there's a lot of resistance to this in terms of requiring people to be vaccinated. And so their position, and I've seen this from other CEOs, is they're not going to require it. Now, a lot of them are taking steps to provide additional safety in the office. We're having a lot of discussions about that. And one of the things we're talking about is, you know, we see a difference among and between buildings. This is what we're doing in terms of our protocols and how we're responding to the pandemic. And we're looking at the protocols that landlords are providing and seeing if there's something in addition to that that the tenants want to do to protect their employees. So we're having a lot of discussion along those lines. Do we want to do a temperature check? Is there some other sort of monitoring that we want to do? And that's the type of discussion that we're having. But we're not, to this point, we're not seeing one office tenant who has said, we're going to require that you have a vaccination before you come back to the office.
Great, thanks, Carrie. Anyone else seeing anything that aligns with what Carrie said, or maybe anything different that's out there? Feel free to just chime in.
Yeah, this is Dana. I think I agree with Carrie. I think, you know, probably one of our partners in the human resources or legal communities would probably be better to answer the question than a panel of real estate folks. But but I will say that you know, there are major concerns from employers surrounding, you know, HIPAA requirements and things like that. So the questions that you do ask as an employer of an employee, you know, we have to be cognizant of that as well. So.
Excellent, thank you. All right, I'm going to move over to another question. So this was submitted by an attendee. If only 30% of businesses are going back to work full-time, are there any concerns with more and more universities doing hybrid learning? which might then affect the CBD development efforts. Who wants to take a stab at this question?
Well, first, let me just qualify. I want to just, sort of clarify the 30% comment that I made. That 30% is, out of the hundreds of clients that we surveyed, only 30% of them said that they plan to go back 5 days a week, 8 to 5, with no flexibility to the schedule. And that's a very specific way of working. The much larger percentage was really just that they were going to be offering a work from home flexibility sort of policy. Only a small percentage of the people that we surveyed planned on staying remote. So really, there's going to be, I don't think, any issue as far as what the activity that's happening in, the CBD, because we're only talking about if, I'm going to be working from home 1 day a week. That's not a huge shift from what we're seeing already. That 30% is really just meaning that there is no flexibility built in to their employees, schedule from this point on.
Got it. Thank you, Andrea, for clarifying that. Anyone else have any thoughts on how, a lessened, workforce downtown might affect, might have an effect with the universities doing any kind of hybrid schedules? Oh, all righty. Well, yeah. I'm going to just throw in one last question for our panelists before we wrap up, as we are getting close to 9:30. So just one more question. So in your opinion, what is needed downtown to ensure that we can compete with our sister cities, to retain talent and continue to grow our workforce?
Yeah, Caitlin, I can answer that. It's all about jobs. It's a brief answer because it only needs to be brief. It's all about jobs. And to that point, if everyone would get a chance to read Don Smith's article in the Business Times yesterday, he nailed it. That's what it's all about. He has it down very firmly in his article. So I encourage everyone to read that article and then find Rich and have a little sit down with him and talk about it. But it's all about jobs.
I can also add something. I also think it's about, I think tomorrow, the PDP is hosting something about, perception of safety. I think that the city, it's incumbent upon the city to take a more responsible stance in how the downtown looks. I appreciate the county executive being on today's meeting. I wonder where the mayor is. I haven't seen him downtown in a year and a half.
One other thing that I'd like to add is, and I agree with Don's article, and I think it is about jobs. And I think that everyone in the region can do their part. If you think about pre-pandemic, right, there was a vibrancy to downtown. And the only way we're going to bring that vibrancy back is to have people regionally come down and frequent the businesses. And as Jason said, in order for them to feel comfortable to frequent the businesses and our cultural district, et cetera, they have to feel safe. They have to feel safe in our buildings. They have to feel safe on our streets. So I think we all as a region have a role to play here, whether we're, hiring someone or whether we're just participating in the economy.
And I agree with Dana, and that's a really good point. I was working with a company last year who was thinking about moving into downtown. And there were some concerns. There were concerns about safety. There were a whole host of concerns. And Caitlin, I reached out to your organization and you folks put together information for me, which made all the difference in the world. We addressed the issues. You folks provided the information. Here are the statistics. Here's what's happening. Here's where we've been. Here's where we're going. And it made the difference. And they ended up relocating to downtown. So it's so important to be able to address that information. And I would encourage anybody who has any concerns to reach out to the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership. And they're just a great resource in providing information that can help people make decisions about office space.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Carrie. I appreciate those kind remarks in your comments. Well, This has been an extremely informative discussion with a lot of interesting insights on what the future of the commercial office sector might look like in downtown moving forward. I'd also like to extend a thank you to Mark for serving as our moderator for this session. He did an excellent job. And also, I'm very grateful to all of our panelists for their time and valuable insights. So thank you to Greg, Dana, Carrie, Andrea, and Jason.
You're welcome.
Awesome.
And
Shannon.
also thank you to all of our attendees for being here today. Together, I know that we can create a stronger, more vibrant, and more welcoming downtown neighborhood for all. So for the attendees, you can view the 2021 State of Downtown Pittsburgh report online at our website at downtownpittsburgh.com. This session was also recorded and will be available by the end of the day today if you'd like to watch again or share with your colleagues. And you can also find a link in the chat to view the 2021 State of Downtown Pittsburgh report. And finally, we invite you to join us for more of our 2021 State of Downtown Pittsburgh Reforge virtual event series. We are just getting started here. We have 2 more sessions lined up for today. The next session will feature the future of downtown retail and restaurants following this session at 10 a.m. And then we're going to dive into the future of downtown mobility, which will take place today at noon. And then tomorrow, there's a whole new lineup. Starting at 8:30, we will be talking about welcoming visitors back to downtown, followed by a session on public safety. And then finally, we will close out the series with a longer session at noon on Wednesday called Digging into Downtown Development, where we will learn about 10 different downtown development projects that are currently underway. So you definitely don't want to miss out on these sessions. So if you haven't already, you can register for these future sessions at downtownpittsburgh.com. Again, thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the series.